And there was this almost like Walter White moment. Walter White, in the Breaking Bad, they had this scene where throughout the entire series, he said, I did it for my family, I did it for my family. And finally his wife, starts asking him, and he says, no, I did it for, she goes, I know, for the family, you did it for the family. And he finally, I got chills just recounting this. And he said, no, I did it for me.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Days End Podcast. This is season 2, episode 18. Really excited because we've got a special guest today, Alex Golimbievsky.
Nailed it.
Almost got it. Alex is a serial entrepreneur, and he's also not shy to or unfamiliar with the startup culture. So we're excited to have him on. So welcome, Alex.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Alex, I wanted to do something a little different on this episode specifically. We typically go straight to the back, right? The back end side. So we wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to share maybe something that you haven't been asked before in terms of your background. So I want to give the audience what you do specifically, because I know that you're with Alex G Consulting, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So you do a lot of consulting at this point, but you've also exited out of companies and that sort of thing. So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share what your background is, but also specifically, I want to know who Alex is. I really want to know before the aspirations of wanting to be an entrepreneur and in the coach, or not the coaching, but the specifically the consulting side of things, what your aspirations were before you even touched any of this world. And so I just kind of, as a two-part question, but I want to give you the reins to kind of run us through something that maybe people haven't heard about you yet.
I love that. So I was born in Ukraine, and I was 4 when we emigrated from there and immigrated to the US. And I was on welfare until I was like 16 years old. We were the product of all the benefits that this beautiful, wonderful country has. And my dad worked 2-3 jobs, but I'm one of 7 kids. At the time when he moved, there was one of 4 kids. And so we had that literal immigrant story of, 4 kids, mom, dad, 2 suitcases, $50 American, didn't speak English. Like, that's how we landed in the US. And so we bounced around from East Coast back to West Coast. And I got to watch my dad work some ridiculously difficult manual jobs while he was putting himself through college, while he was getting his mechanics license for it. And then before long in my childhood, like, you don't know you're poor when you're a kid, right? You kind of understand it as you get into your teenage years, but it wasn't obvious to me until later. And it was 7th grade actually was the first day, because we did garage sales. We went and got secondhand clothes everywhere that we could. And I remember my mom got me shoes, and I wasn't really aware of what fashion even was at 7th grade. And they were pink shoes, and I walked into school with pink shoes, and I got roasted, absolutely annihilated, right? And that was the first day that I was like, holy crap. We aren't like everybody else. Like, yes, I had to learn English. I had to go through ESL, English as a second language. I had to do all those things, but they were my normal. But only that it created this seed within me that wasn't as healthy as what I'm going to make it sound later. But it was, don't be poor. Don't be somebody that can't afford all the things. Eventually, it cultivated into, I think, a better vision of, my parents and grandparents and my great-grandparents all came from Ukraine. My great-grandparents went through the Holodomor, which is the intentional starvation of the Ukrainian people. And it was millions and millions that starved. And I used to grow up hearing those stories around, like, don't talk to strangers. Kids get eaten. Like, it was those real trauma-based stories that were passed down. And so eventually I arrived at this life mantra of, I'm going to change my family legacy. I come from a very rural, poverty-stricken background, no education. My whole family came from that. And there was a chip on my shoulder to not be poor. But the big vision was, I want to have my kids grow up in a world where I continue to stand on the shoulders of my dad and this wonderful country that they've allowed us, the benefits and and support that we have, but I want to make a big impact in a big way. And so that ambition carried me through corporate and then eventually into entrepreneurship.
Wow. I'm kind of curious. I feel like, because I come from a background too of independency, and I definitely probably had a lot more luxuries than what you came from and your family, but especially being growing up here in America, but even still kind of like that, I don't want to say impoverished, but just a rough background in terms of, and our father taught us to really like headstrong, be independent, and your character and that sort of thing. And so I'm curious from your perspective. I'm sure you've worked with like a lot of people that come from similar backgrounds, maybe particularly close to what yours are. And I know that that's like the standard way of thinking is, okay, you come from a impoverished background or like a difficult background, and that builds you into being this really well-rounded, going for the tough things in life, entrepreneur mindset type of person. But really, do you feel like that comes from, and you're talking about legacy and wanting to change that for your family, do you feel like that comes from wanting to give them what you didn't have, or just the idea of wanting to go to or accomplish the things that you never got a chance to accomplish before? And I'm not wording that right, because I want there to be a contrast. The contrast would be typically, I've never had this before, so I want a fast car, I want a big house, I want all these different things, versus I never got an opportunity to explore and adventure and really see the other side of life. Does it come from that? Do you feel like, is there a divide there for you at all?
It's an awesome question. I mean, there were things that we got to do once we became
Poorly asked, I'm
successful.
sorry.
No, it's a phenomenal question. I think, I think here's the mold that I see in entrepreneurs. They are overcomers. I had an executive coach. I've had the same executive coach for about 6 years now. She's amazing. One of the things that she says is to create a high performance, like person. You want high adversity, high support. Now, not all of us got the high support, but many of us got the high adversity. And what I've seen is it can make or break you. You either fall into the victim mentality, or you fall into the I'm going to just crush through walls mentality, right? And I think some of us, I think there's a lottery, I think there's luck. I think, I'm oversimplifying it, because there's nowhere near as simple as just choose to break down walls. But I was one of the fortunate ones that got to deal with the challenges and got to get these little tastes of overcoming adversity. And I think before long, it becomes this instilled, confidence isn't even the word, like mantra of like, I do hard things and I can overcome difficult things. And so the why that propelled me was this belief. It was a self-sacrificial. I loved and I knew right away that I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to be a really great father. And I didn't want to have them have the same challenges. I didn't get to do sports. I didn't get to do anything that required instruments. Like I didn't get to do all the things that like my American friends got to do. And for me, I wanted to do something different that allowed them to not fear, lack, or not fear that we didn't have enough, but to really be able to grow into themselves. And so we live in a pretty modest house. The big splurge is we have 2 Teslas that we freaking love. We love our
There you
cars.
go.
But past that, like we live in like a 2,500 square foot house. We do more experiences than have the things for it. We spent a month last year, traveling through Europe. Those are fun things to do. But the thing that really drove us there is like, we want to have a family unit that has dinner every single night, that I don't have to work crazy hours, that we can invest into our kids. And even as a young man, that sounds more pure than it really was, because there was this chip on my shoulder of proving myself, of proving that I'm lovable and worthy through my productivity, through my achievements. That was real. But the conscious part that drove me was I want to do better and leap my family forward in a big way.
Man, that's I love what you said that, right? So one of the questions that I had, and I think you just answered it, is I have a lot of friends from immigrant backgrounds as well, and they have kind of the same story. And so the question I was going to ask you was, does it give you the chip on your shoulder that drives you, right? Like, is that the chip that's on your shoulder? I think as entrepreneurs and as serial entrepreneurs, we all have a chip, right? Like mine is not going back to homelessness, not being poor, not being broke, right? Like, and so it's like for me, it's like that's the chip on my shoulder that kind of drives me, but it only drives you to a certain point, and then once you reach that point, you go, oh, that can't be the driver anymore, right? Like, what else is there, right?
That is
So for
so
for the
true.
question for you is, when you reach that point where the chip got you to where you wanted to be, what else drives you after that?
You know, that has been such a long journey, and it's worth telling this story. There was a point where I did change my family legacy. I was 33 years old. My company had just got acquired, and the company that acquired us, that CEO retired, and I was the new CEO. And so I was a hotshot 33-year-old making good money, you know, it was about $6.5 million annually for it. And I had all the things, I had all the promise for it too, but it was a brutal experience. It was one of the most harrowing 2 years of my life. It broke me from a mental health perspective. And my wife wanted me to quit. And there was this almost like Walter White moment. Walter White, in the Breaking Bad, they had the scene where throughout the entire series, he said, I did it for my family. I did it for my family. And finally his wife, you know, starts asking him and he says, no, I did it for, she goes, I know, for the family, you did it for the family. And he finally, I got chills just recounting this. And he said, no, I did it for me. I did it for me. And it's this realization that I had my Walter White moment of, I was saying I was doing it for the family. But just like you said, Michael, it was that chip on my shoulder that I was wanting to prove myself. And once I had changed my family legacy and the ability to like exit and live a normal life and visit, be there with my kids, I lost years with my kids. I failed that test and I didn't go back. And it led me to a deeper, darker breaking point for it. And that happened 2020. So this is not that long ago. And that has spawned this year's worth of me. I had deconstructed why I set out to be an entrepreneur, you know, low resolution things like don't be poor, change my family legacy, to now like I have that. And now what? What is going to drive me? I went into a really deep depression for 2 years after I sold my company for more money than I ever dreamed of selling. And yet it gutted me. And so I had to change the mindset from striving to prove myself to finding an adequately meaningful, noble goal, a calling that I can throw myself into. But the way you pursue those things, if you're striving, you throw yourself bodily into situations because you're just wanting to prove that you're worthy. But if you have a calling, you have to work with a level of sustainability because there's a big picture here that you're working towards and you can't throw yourself bodily or wreck your relationships along the way. And so that transition was a 2 year dark transition for me, but it has now changed how I live for sure. And now I volunteer at the Tulsa Boys Home, the Tulsa Girls Home, the foster care system here in Tulsa. We're mentoring different pieces. The coaching is a really big part of it. We go to retirement homes as a family and like visit the elderly. It's all the stuff that it sounds like glorious and crazy, but like it's all the stuff that I had told myself that when I had the opportunity to do, I didn't. That we recalibrated what the big picture is that we're now leaning into and living.
Ooh. I think you said it, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think you had said it. You're really focusing on the coaching and consulting part of it because you you're only kind of half doing it because you wanted to spend a majority of the time with your kids. Am I wrong?
No,
and
you know that.
Yeah, that's awesome because I talk about this probably way too often. I bet Michael's gonna be rolling his eyes, but my time in the oil field, right? Almost 10 years in the oil field, I felt like I gave all of those years of really striving for something and to find myself where I am now with Michael, with the podcast, like we talked about on the phone. We don't really even know where this thing's going to go. Right. But at the same time, I have to align myself accordingly to like the things that I find the most important. And I know for sure that's my son, almost about to be 1 year old, my wife, right, being a present father, but I really want to get around people like that understand and come from the times when it didn't work out too well, and you really had to hit rock bottom. And so, what a better place to be in than seeking out entrepreneurs because you know more about it than anybody else. But
I think I think you hit something right there, right? It's the people that you surround yourself with, like, are really what like kind of make you, right? Like it can push you into a direction that you were never meant to go into, or it can push you into the direction that you were meant to go into, right? And it's very dependent on who you get around. And so my question to you, Alex, is who are those early people that you got around that you were like, okay, like this is the circle I found the circle.
That's such a good question because, you know, one of the things that we all feel in entrepreneurship is pretty lonely, right? We don't have oh, my boss was such a jerk, or somebody took credit for my report, or whatever problems. Like, we're talking about payroll problems. We're talking about not making any money, trying to figure out the customer stuff. And so it's really hard. I had the good fortune when I became an entrepreneur that I went to all the networking groups and met a couple of like tepid relationships. But these entrepreneurs, I was like, they're sharp. They're no further along than I am. They don't appear to know all the things for it, but they have similar values. They feel very driven. And so this is now 7.5 years ago. We created something called the Founders. We literally just me and one of the friends that I developed, you know, again, an early relationship with, we were like, wouldn't it be cool to get a bunch of other founders together that meet every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, have beers, commiserate, you know, gripe, you know, coach each other on our blind spots for it. And we had, out of the 10 that started, we have 7 that we've now been meeting for almost going on 8 years now. And where we didn't know what the heck we were doing, all 7 of us have either had exits or are currently running multi-million-dollar companies for it. And I don't think it was based on us selecting the perfect group. I think it was because of the support of the group. It was because of the encouragement and the resourcing and the edification and encouragement for it. Like, that is why you don't become the statistic. I think you need that support.
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, yeah, because as entrepreneurs, right, it's massively lonely. Most of the people that you're around on a daily basis have no idea what you're talking about, right? I mean, even your closest family are going, yeah, it's great. You know, awesome. I have no idea what that means, but it's fantastic for you. You know, like, so like, I mean, I've actually got to the place where I don't even talk to family anymore. I'm like, look, like you look dead in the face every time I talk to you, and that is not validating by any means. And
it's almost uncomfortable because like the problems that we deal with are like, man, like we have a big pitch coming up over here. This customer could be really huge, or we're trying to get all this. And they're over there like, yeah, I got yelled at by a customer today. And it feels like such a huge disconnect between the problems that we have. It almost feels bad to gripe of like, yeah, my employees, it's really hard to get them encouraged. And they're like, yeah, those are first world problems. Like, how dare you complain about all of that? It still sucks. It's still hard.
It is, right? Or like, okay, I need to make a new hire, but I don't have the money to make the new hire, but I have to make the new hire. How are we going to make this work? How is payroll going to work, right? Do we have to borrow against our AP or AR? You know, all that stuff. So, man, these are real problems of entrepreneurs, and I think that you're kind of nailing it on the head, right? And I see the coaching aspect coming out of you a little bit here too, which is really cool to see. But I think a question that I have is, in the early days of building your company, what did that look like, and where was that pivotal point where you go, okay, this can work? Like, I think this thing has legs, and I'm going to go all in. Like, what was that pivotal moment for you, and how did you push through it?
You know, I wish I had more mentors. We did have our peer group of other entrepreneurs, but I didn't graduate college. I read a bunch. I think just checked recently, I have like 270 books on my Audible. Like, I'm just an avid listener and cruise through books. And so one of the books I read early on was The Startup J Curve. And it describes this kind of J shape where you launch and there's a lot of fanfare, a lot of confidence. And then you collide with the market and you realize you're slumping down, and it sucks. People don't like your product. People complain. They leave, and it's difficult. And then you get to this valley of despair of like, oh my goodness, nothing's working. Everything we thought was wrong. What do we do? And then you see the silver lining and it starts going back up. That is where you
Yeah.
finally get this product market fit. And one of the best descriptions of it is they said, when you're not pushing your product on people, and before long, people are pulling on it. They're referring other people. They're telling other people
Ooh.
about it. And that becomes the beginnings of like, oh, things are clicking into place. I'm able to not just have the product or service that solves the problem in a, compelling in a way that people are willing to pay for, but I'm also able to explain it in words that they understand, that they resonate with. And that's when you start going up. So you go from the product market fit piece at the very bottom of the valley of despair to like just solving the problem, not even worrying a business model, then worrying about, okay, what's the business model? Let's figure out the pricing. Let's figure out how much to charge. Is it annual? Is it monthly? Is it like a whole thing? Then you worry about scaling it. And then you have like the whole harvest of whether or not you sell it. And our first two companies, we failed back to back. We threw $70,000 of all the real estate stuff that we've saved up, and that one failed over like a year and a half because we thought when we got our first customer, we made it. It was Mecca. We got it, and we didn't, and we lost a lot of customers along the way. But we had left our full-time jobs, and then now we were scrambling, and so that company failed because we honestly had a bad idea. We heard people give feedback, but we were in love with our own idea. And we said, if somebody complained about it, we're like, well, they're just not our customer. And it's this classic question of, do you pivot or do you persevere?
Right.
Do you stick with it or do you like change based on the feedback that you get? Well, we didn't pivot very much at all for the first company, and it failed for that reason. Eventually, when we did call a spade, and like, hey, we're pushing a limber rope uphill. We're not getting any traction here. Then we started a second company, and that one did much better. That company, we raised $130,000 of friends and family money. We got Uber, Lyft, Aflac, United, Walmart. We got some huge names on this recruiting platform that we built, but we had a leaky bucket, and we fell into the same problem we did at the first one, which is like we didn't pause long enough to really diagnose what the problem was. We just kept pushing activity. And so I was just on sales mode, 24/7. We worked crazy hours. We onboarded 60 customers in one of our years, and then we lost 60 customers in the same year.
Oh my
And
God.
that company ultimately failed too. And so the thing that finally changed is I think there is this sense of confidence you get of overcoming, going through stuff and figuring things out. And that had to be tempered with me recognizing that I am either an incredible liar to myself or I'm incredibly gullible to myself. And I will convince myself that it's fine and that we can keep going. And only when I really stop to check myself now that I've developed this I called it a paranoid optimism. Optimism because you can get through anything you want, but paranoid in the sense of like, who's coming after me? Where is this going to go wrong? What is going to make this fail? That is a fascinating balance that when I figured out and I didn't worry about what I thought, but what I was being told and use customer direct feedback, vote with your wallet level feedback, that things really start clicking into place. That third company, we did $600,000 in its first 6 months. And then it was acquired by the end of the first year because after two failures, you either stay dumb or you get smart. We got smart and we started listening to what people were telling us. And so that one was very successful immediately, but it was through the ashes of like brutal 4.5 years of failure, $200,000 of our own invested money, never mind all the, salary that we forewent. We were on welfare. It was a trial.
Man, that's huge, right? And even the friends and family, right? I mean, the weight of losing that and the weight of trying to get through of like, man, there was a lot of trust there, right? There was a lot of trust of saying, okay, hey, this is gonna make it, but you're right, it's either you get smart or get dumb, but I think it's these pivotal moments of being in limbo all the freaking time that makes entrepreneurs some of the best context switchers in the world, right? Yeah. I mean, it's and that's really what it is, right? Because the entrepreneur, you're either wearing 17 hats, or you're wearing none, right? And if you're wearing none, you're not a part of it. If you're wearing 17 hats, all in, right? Like, come on, like get on board or get off board. And so, man, that's I want to dive into that a little bit more though. And so now we're in the new business. We have 600,000 in revenue for in 6 months, acquired after 1 year. So you guys ramped revenue very quickly in the latter part of the 6 months for that exit, right? And I'm guessing you probably had like it sounds like you had a pretty large multiple on that as well. And so,
It
which is
was,
really cool.
yeah, it was great. That one, like again, I'm of nothing if not transparent. It was an aqua hire, to be honest, because what
Okay.
we got was it was almost like the Don from The Godfather, a offer we couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
Like one of our major customers was, I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's pretty close to that net worth. He has like 60 businesses that he owns majority of. He dabbled in everything. And so he was like,
Pressure.
great work. Good job. These are small potatoes. Let me put you into a bigger company for it. And so he made us an offer that after, failing two companies and living off of legit food stamps in my adult life again, that I got off of as a kid, I was back in welfare again. We were like, yeah, let's take it. We'll go. And so it did allow us to jump into a different arena, and it was
Yeah.
a much larger business with much more complexity. I won't say it's a mistake because it brought me here. I will say that if that presents itself again, I wouldn't have taken it. I won't take it. Like it was, we we chased the outcome without understanding all the pieces. And to be honest, as a first acquisition, we also didn't do our due diligence on us moving into this much more successful company. And it
Right.
had a lot of problems. And that's where, 2 years of like really harrowing work really began. I thought I was
Wow.
through the crucible and I hadn't even started.
Man, taking.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I don't want to ruin your train of thought, Michael. Go ahead.
Man,
I've got a couple though. I'm excited.
yeah, I want to. So, taking what you're kind of the experience that you had, the failures, the adversity, the depression, the everything that you brought in. What are some? And let's go present day, right? With some of the entrepreneurs that you coach. How are you being able to depict that up front in entrepreneurs today? To lead them in a different direction because you already see it, and how many of those entrepreneurs do you see are headed in the same story as you were?
You
That's a good
know,
question.
it's a great question, Michael. I think if we weren't optimistic and confident in our ideas, we wouldn't have started them to begin with. So you need that dose of I can do it, let's get after it. All of my entrepreneurs have this almost double-edged sword of like, I'm confident this is the thing, with the right amount of imposter syndrome of like, can I do this? What's going to happen? I don't know
Yeah.
what to do next. And it is hard. You have to do both. And so as a coach, what I try to do is this kind of split twofold, which is I want people to realize that there's usually much more nuance and sophistication and much more, context around a particular problem or challenge than the automatic, simple answer that we all gravitate towards. It rarely is a, unilateral single problem or challenge that is responsible for your product or service not working. There's a multitude. And so you kind of have to lead through questions, somebody to wrestle with what they believe is going on, while also reinforcing to them that, listen, you've been dealing with adversity your whole life. And though you may not know how to get there, you don't even know where there is, you don't know how to do all the things, you do know how to take the next step. And the next step after that, and the next step after that. And it is this confidence that you have to have that even though you don't know exactly where you're going or where you'll end up, that you can follow step by step what you need to do. And so there is this, I think honestly, even all of us on this call, every really experienced entrepreneur, we all fall into the belief that we've got it figured out and that that is the thing that we're just going to lean into and we're going to persevere through. But it's the right amount of stepping back and not rushing to answer the question, but to question the answer that you have to really stop and ponder for you to make sure that you're actually pushing where you need to push versus pivoting when you need to pivot.
I'm so fortunate to have Michael. I'm going to plug Michael for a minute because he's my anchor.
I appreciate that.
He's constantly texting me. I'll text him. I'm like, hey man, we really need to get a studio. We need to do all this stuff right now. We need lights. We need camera. And he's like, whoa, whoa. He's like, just think about that for like the next 2 weeks. And then like I'll text him back like 3 days later. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, nah, let's not do that. It's probably not a
I
good
love
time.
that so much. It's the yin and yang, right?
Yeah, it's for season 2, it's been a godsend for sure. I'm curious, because you do coaching for entrepreneurs, and hopefully this is a good question. What, if you could answer this, what do you feel like draws an entrepreneur to you for coaching more? Education, right? A new entrepreneur who understands the internet and AI and all this kind of stuff and realizes, hey, this is like who I need to go to get the right advice before I stumble, or someone who relates with, hey, yeah, I just went through the worst years in my life, and I need somebody else that understands that. Because I know when you think about other areas of life where you can relate with people, whether that's your parent to their son or their daughter or whatever, and we tend to, the parent tells you, hey, you probably shouldn't do that because I've done that before, and we're like, let me figure it out. Right? And entrepreneurism, it's almost like it's instantaneously accepted because you go through some really difficult times. So what would you say brings more traffic your direction, education or strife in business?
I think it's fascinating. What brings people to me is that I have done all the things wrong and that I'm able to tell somebody in a business like, oh yeah, here's how you want to think about that. Here's what you want to do. Here are the options ahead of you for it. And that often is enough for people to be like, oh shoot, there are things that I do not know. And one of the biggest things is that we all index on things we know because we know them. But because there are things we don't know. And so you have no clue. And so most of the time it is a twofold strategy for me, which is like, let me do direct, practical, tangible, actionable teaching and coaching of like how you use email marketing, which is still to date one of the best dollar for dollar investments that you can make. How do you do a good campaign? How do you do an omni-channel strategy where you're hitting them on LinkedIn and text message or calls and LinkedIn and Facebook, and you're doing a whole strategy? But the thing that keeps people and where I see where we make the most difference is that interpersonal side. And bluntly, knowledge almost rarely moves the needle. We have knowledge at our fingertips everywhere. What really I've now coached about 250 plus businesses and people for it across myriad of different industries. The one commonality is that knowledge is not generally the limiting factor. It is that there's a bias, a fear, a trauma, some barrier to you trusting to delegate, you leaning into the unknown, you asking the difficult questions for your partner, you leaning into your business partner and saying like, listen, I think you're failing here. Like those are the things that keep us back. And so the knowledge is the thing that is the shiny object that brings people to start a conversation. But very quickly, we recognize that you need both parts, but the part that enables it is you feeling confident, secure to take the risks, to do the thing for it. And that is an internal piece. And that's much harder to solve.
2-part question. And you kind of touched on it with talking about rushing and that sort of thing, but I'm sure it's a little bit more in depth, right? I mean, you could probably branch off any direction you want to. Where do you find most companies, most founders go to park themselves in their business to, and this is kind of a vulgar way of putting it, but to die, right? Their business to die. Like which grave are they choosing to park at?
I love that question. It almost feels like they want to spread themselves across 50 graves. They try to do all the things. Okay. They try to do too much. Everybody's, and we know now, and your listeners, I'm sure have heard it, that if you say everybody's your customer, no one's your customer. You got to be specialized, you got to be niche, you got to focus on all of that. But even within that, never mind your customer, you need to be super clear about what the most important problem is that moves the needle the most, creates the most disproportionate amount of value that people are willing to pay for, and almost at the exclusion of all the other things that you can do, you have to focus there. And most entrepreneurs dig their grave because they're digging a grave that's 60 foot by 60 foot, and it's just too much. We all have only finite amount of energy, time, money, social capital. I read this quote, and I forget who to attribute it to. All these entrepreneurs come in here worrying about their competition, but startups rarely get murdered by their competition. They commit suicide. They just run out of gas and they run out of steam. And you do that because you're trying to do all the things instead of focusing with discipline and ruthlessly focusing on the things that have the most leverage in your business.
Do you find that, for instance, the people that the business owners and founders that you coach, do you find that they have almost like a glutton for punishment in a way? Because I feel like you kind of have to a little bit as an entrepreneur, right? I mean, I spent, like I said, in the oil field, a really good amount of time doing rescue safety, so leaving that, I don't miss it, except for every now and then I'll wake up at 2:00 in the morning thinking I've gotten an H2S call for an H&P rig out in Orla, Texas or something, and my blood starts going. I have this little bit of an excitement, right, for it. So it's like even though those times are really tough and you're able to talk about it now because you're through it, but there almost kind of seems to be like a tie there for you wouldn't be an entrepreneur if you were not. And of course, you talked about that could be how you're raised or some of the things you go through as a child and or young adult. But do you find like that the people that you coach specifically kind of have like that little bit of like an adrenaline rush for maybe making really tough decisions that they probably don't need to make at the present moment, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I 100%. Like that's also astute. My wife lovingly says, like, Alex, sometimes I think you're just addicted to ass kickings, right?
There you go.
It's like right when you're calm, right when things are fine, right when life is good, you want to do the next big thing. And I do think that is a component, right? That's a component for all of us of like here's the reality. A lot of business is upfront challenge, overcoming some wall, breaking through a barrier for it. But the other half of the business is the monotonous consistency, day to day, showing up, pushing it. Like you guys know this. You guys are building this podcast, and it doesn't happen overnight. You generally don't have one viral episode that makes the whole thing. You consistently provide value for the audience for it. They consistently hear it, and they continue to tune in. They share it more, and you build and grow a following. Well, if you have this shiny object syndrome because you go after the challenges, if you don't have a challenge, you almost manufacture one, then as soon as you get to the point where you have almost a line of sight of like, oh, I now see what's behind this wall, there's a tendency to want to move to the next wall. And that is why I think people spread themselves thin a lot more than they should.
Yeah, this is I'm over here just writing a ton of notes right here because
that's what I'm doing right now. You said something and it just really resonated.
You hit home on like 3 or 4 quotes. I couldn't write fast enough because I have chicken scratching. Now I can't read what I wrote. But one of the things,
every seminar, right?
One of the things that stuck with me, a couple things here is knowledge is not a limiting factor. There is a buffer in trusting to delegate. And then also, entrepreneurs rarely get murdered by their competition. They commit suicide, right? And then you have to break through the monotony and really be consistent, right? And so this actually hit home because I did this today, right? So I'm building a company called Gauge Technologies, right? So we're a data governance, data security company, and we help like the defense industrial base and a bunch of other companies as well with security as well as their compliance on a federal level and state and some other things as well. But one of the things today is I was on a sales call today, and a guy, a potential client, mentioned something, and it struck me because I was like, my sales team is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like, why are they saying stuff when they're not supposed to be saying stuff? And it piqued my eye. Customer was cool; he didn't care about it, but it piqued me. So I was like, that's it. I'm gonna start making the cold call myself.
Mm.
You know, and I was like, and then so I was on a drive, and I was just kind of driving around. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna cold call. That's stupid. Like, I hired the sales team so I can be like actually in the meetings that matter, right? Not the monotony of like cold calling 200 people a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that right here just hit home because I was like, okay, like trust the process, right? Trust the process, trust in and be consistent, right? So you don't need to take it over. There just needs that now there's coaching opportunities, right? To say, hey,
Yes,
look, like
exactly.
this is how we're going to do it, right? And this is how each one of you need to be able to speak about the company. So there's consistency in the messaging, and
Like,
that like rung true in my head just now.
so that's so true, Michael, because like when I say like stick with it, it doesn't mean you do all the things. It doesn't mean you roll up sleeves and you're the coach that runs on the field to, try to carry the ball. It means that you don't abdicate and just move your focus somewhere else until like that it is in a good place. And so from a sales perspective, it probably is doing check-ins. It's making sure you're coaching them up. It's making sure you're holding them like lovingly, compassionately, crazy accountable for it. Of like, look, if you succeed, I succeed. If we succeed, you succeed. Like we all want the same things. So let's put everything on the table here and talk through it.
Absolutely.
And so it's very quick to easy to say like I hired a salesperson or a sales team. They got it, and then we shift focus. But sales is the only of a train. It's the only car that pulls the others. Everything else,
Absolutely.
HR, technology, security, like everything else is dragged by sales. And that is one of the areas that I feel like as founders, um, we should relinquish last. And even within sales, as a quick, like tactical thing, you could have somebody else do the prospecting of who's the right customer, the calling and connecting with them, the questions and qualifications, and then letting you close, or maybe a few really diligent closers
Absolutely.
do that. And so you can bifurcate sales into a lot of processes and keep the most important part, which is staying close to the customer, talking about the deal, driving the value home, and like closing the contract, and then making sure you delegate or automate all the other stuff that is much more monotonous and transactional for it.
Yeah, I love that.
Here's a question that I'm really interested in, kind of off the wall, right? How many of those core people that you started with on those companies, I'm going to go back real fast, on those companies were with you through 1, 2, and 3?
That's such a great question. All right, that's a hurtful one, but I love it. So we started with 3 on the first one. We moved to 3 on the second one. We added a 4th on the second one. And one of the biggest, we all make mistakes. I celebrate mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes that I still grieve to this day is that it was my best friend that was underperforming, that as we moved into, all 4 of us moved into the 3rd company, the one that did really well, the one that started really firing on all cylinders. He was underperforming. I was a coward and I was a bad leader and I didn't have the hard conversations. I skirted the issues. When I had the conversation, mitigated my words, beat around the bush, and I loved him so much that I didn't have the hard truth there. And so I had a mutiny. Very frankly, the other 2 founders said, hey, it's either us or him. And so I had to fire my best friend. It ruined a decade-long friendship. That sucked. Then the 3 of us moved to the 4th company that we took over. And one of those, my brother, got tapped on the shoulder. So he left to start his own company for it too. But we did pretty good. I lost 1 co-founder along the way. But that was a brutal lesson that even now I've forgiven myself. I've given myself the grace of I didn't know what I was doing, but it has changed how I have all my conversations now by far.
I have some comments around this.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. I'm going to process some of this stuff.
I have a co-founder story as well, right? So like I had a company before the one that I started before I met Will as well, and we had a falling out, right? And we were best friends and everything, right? But and it was basically outside of my own company that I co-founded, and man, it was probably one of the hardest lessons. It took me 3 years to get over, and there's some off the wall times where in my head I'm like, I have some bitterness there still. So even today I'm kind of probably still working through it. But it taught me one important lesson, is choosing partnerships well. And if you're going into business with anybody, whether it's a friend or anybody, it's being able to outline role responsibilities up front.
Ooh, that's so
Up front.
good. How do you and Will do that now?
So he is good. So I'm going to tell you, the only reason why I came to this podcast is because he had a track record, right? He already done season 1. He had everything in play. He knew how to edit. He knew how to, I was like, I really don't want to create a new skill. And by the time I tried it and I was like, no, this isn't for me, right? He had all the skills to be able to produce and to be able to take a podcast from start to finish, right? And he had done that for 25 episodes, right, on season 1. So he had a track record to be able to say, yeah, I can do this, right? It wasn't say, hey, let's start something and we'll figure it out along the way. He already kind of figured out some of the roadblocks. And so going into season 2, where I had expertise in like customer acquisition and being able to like get people onto the podcast, like how can we move from this like family, friends, and people that we know and acquaintances that we know and like 2-3 people down the line to people that we've never met before, telling the stories that are really impacting people in our audience, right? And that was really what it's about, is how can we have an impact on both sides. Our audience is very much made up of, on the one side, it's the person that wants to be an entrepreneur or is an entrepreneur, but they haven't left their 9 to 5 and they're trying to figure this out and they don't know what to do, right? They're stuck and they don't know what to do. On the other hand, we have experienced entrepreneurs that are stuck in a problem, or they just sold their company and they don't know what to do next, right? And so we have these both sides, and so I was able to come in and really help kind of shape what we see today with the help of Will. And he was able to pile on production to be able to make that happen.
Like you said, Alex, to community, so
Yes.
probably once or twice a month or so, Michael and I meet up for, cigars at a local cigar place, and we just sit there, couple waters, and just hash it all out. Things that aren't working, analytics, and, what do we even want from this? Of course, with podcasts, it can so quickly change, right? I mean, everything's so, like you said, niche and trending that you kind of have to, you get overwhelmed if you're not willing to do the controversial stuff, which is what we always say on the podcast. We're not a controversial podcast. We're not going to have, I won't even go into it, but that's, if you want overnight success, talking about that, right? Well, 3-month success, just go do that. Talk about any of the stuff, the outlandish stuff that's happening right now around the world. And if you can do that pretty well, you're probably going to make it pretty big. And so in the world that we're in, you asked me too, like what separates us apart from everyone else. I think just being willing to, adapt and being willing to have those tough conversations like you're talking about, just help us to navigate appropriately. And then we found very quickly in season 2, there's like, okay, we set a time limit of like, let's say an hour and a half on the podcast. And next thing we know, that the guest is bringing it to 2 hours. So I'm like, okay, there's something here, and it's you nail it perfectly with the community and that's so interesting. The people that you kind of lost along the way, because I had that too. So going into it with Michael, I had already kind of went through a bunch of pain points and realized that I was ready to make the right decisions and the tough decisions happen. And here we are, still early days. So
it's huge, because I think there's a quote. I'm a Mark Twain fan, but he has this awesome quote, and it's what a man learns by dragging a cat by the tail, he can learn no other way. And
that's good.
You can be told some things, and that's actually one of the big blind spots that we all have, which is like, hey, you should have hard conversations. You should not be afraid to lean into the uncomfortable stuff. Everybody hears that and it says, yeah, check, I do that. And then you have a falling out with a founder, and then you have a impasse with somebody. And then you realize, at least for me, that I wasn't. I thought I was actually pretty candid, and it became very obvious when we had that conversation, the mutiny, that I didn't. One of my new philosophies that was birthed from that is that if you ever fire somebody and they are surprised, it's your failure as a leader. That
Oh,
means you did
100%.
not give them the feedback and understanding along the way. And it's a hard lesson, but it's changed me for the better of who I am, and it's changed how I interact with my kids and my wife. It's a life philosophy now, not a business one.
Michael, the great thing that Michael does is I played 20 years of basketball. My philosophy in life, and I'm a safety and field manager for my company, kind of in line for director role and that sort of thing. But specifically, I think what kind of helps me excel in that lane is it doesn't matter who takes the final shot, as long as we win, that's all I care about. What I'm now dealing with
100%.
on the other side of that, on the flip side of that, when you think about being self-employed and wanting to get out of the 9 to 5 and start a business or work on a cool project, whatever it might be, on the flip side of that, the problem I'm dealing with is now I have a baby, this thing, right? This thing is my baby. And so every now and occasionally, Michael's like, hey, we might want to do this. And I'm like, hold on. I was like, I don't want to do any of that. But so I have to reel that in, and he does a great job of being able to, and I would imagine, Alex, that you do too for the entrepreneurs that you coach. He has a great way of being able to sit down and dissect, okay, this is why I said that, not because what you're doing is wrong or not working. I just feel like it could be better. And so it kind of takes it gently from your hands. But I definitely am struggling with a lot of that right now. Is I thought that I was all about, hey, whoever wants to take the shot, I'm all about winning. And then I realized very quickly that I'm also still human. So,
Oh, good insight.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome.
You've been on countless podcasts, right? And stages, specifically speaking, sharing your journey. What's a question that you've never been asked but wish somebody would, and what would that answer be?
Because I was a reader, the question that I would want to ask is what books or resources or thought leaders changed your life? And there's a couple that come to mind most. One is Lean Startup. Your audience is probably familiar with it. Eric Ries. It's the concept of small, cheap experiments to validate that you are or are not correct with whatever assumption is, that this is the right product, this is the right pricing, this is the right messaging, this is the right positioning. And it is not launching big and doing all the fanfare of a launch, that you launch something ugly and early to get early feedback. Instrumental. So that's one. There's one more that I really like, and it's a book called Pitch Anything by Oren Clough. It's I don't know if he has a revised book. I read it about 10 years ago, but this dude raised money for a living. He raised on average, I think, like $2 million a week on behalf of other companies. So the dude was first a psychology of the sales process, a psychology of how you approach conversations. He talked about having the alpha frame and the beta frame. Beta is the supplicant, the one that's asking for the thing. The alpha is the one that has the offer for it. And he broke my mold of when I walk into an investor meeting, when I walk into a customer meeting, when I walk into an employee meeting, there are different frames of an interaction that change. And it isn't the people, it's the frame. The classic example they have in there too is if a doctor gets pulled over by a cop, the cop has the law moral frame, right? You're speeding, it's yes, sir, no, sir, the doctor's, whatever it is. That doctor has that cop come into his doctor's office. They're the same people, but now there's a completely different frame. The doctor's the expert frame. He knows all the things. You sit down, shut up, and let me tell you what you need to know. And they have these same kind of frames for customer conversations, for investors, that will change your approach and understanding. And also you can start recognizing when somebody's trying to, hijack a frame. And if you're doing an investor meeting, for instance, I did a lot of investor stuff. You want to have the prize frame of your money's as green as anybody else's. It doesn't matter where I get my money from. You're lucky to be here because there's only one of my company, but there's tons of investors out there like you. And if you have a quant that says, excuse me, what is the feasibility of whatever? They're trying to wrestle a financial frame, and you can be like, hey, look, the numbers all add up. Don't worry about that. We'll get to that. The reality is you need to strike now because we're about to close this thing. And you're like, you can either fall into it and be led down that path, and now you're having to like explain on these idiosyncratic financial levels, or you can be really clear about like what the most important frame is to keep. And so psychologically, it was a master class of how to approach just people, all interactions.
Oh, that's awesome.
So with you talking about resources, especially as like a question that we could kind of go into some of the things that helped you specifically and probably help some of your clients as well, that I would imagine that you probably share with them. This is going to be an interesting question. How beneficial are podcasts in the world of entrepreneurial and startup and culture and that sort of thing? How influential can a podcast for people that have gone through similar things like yourself, and do those even really resonate to the community of entrepreneurs like we kind of hope that they do?
Yes, I think both from you eventually find these podcasts and the hosts and the way their approach is that you stick with and you listen. I have like a good 4 or 5 podcasts that I would consistently stick with. But then you also get shares because there's a topic, a subject matter expert, or a story that really drives that you share. But it isn't just the audience. I might get a client out of this, but it doesn't matter, because the reality is the value is far past just that one published podcast. What I do, can I peel back the curtain of every podcast that I do?
Please.
So what I do after every single podcast is I run that through a transcription service that gives me attribution of who said what, the speaker attribution. I have a podcast chat GPT that has all my transcripts and podcasts, and it becomes the content engine, because now I can pull direct quotes. I can pull things based on themes. And so instead of having a cheapy chat GPT, generic AI, whatever, I'm able to say like, hey, across these podcasts, what have I talked about when it comes down to delegation or having hard conversations? What quotes have I said? And in a batched way across 17 different podcasts, I'm able to pull actual quotes, insights, different things from you and from me, and pull that into like a whole content engine. So one podcast can impact, and have potential investors and customers from an audience. But if you're a sharp entrepreneur, I would argue that is the very beginning of it. And it needs to be used, cut, sliced, published in a lot of different forms. And there's a lot more tools out there that do that, like Cast Magic. It's an AI tool that literally can ingest and do a lot of that for you. So I'm a big believer. I do podcasts as often as I can.
I love that. Going down this road, I'm a huge AI guy. I'm building AI.
I knew it was coming.
So like I literally, this is almost every podcast that we're talking about AI. What are people's stances?
You say Michael's ears spring up. Yeah.
You say A. I'm going to finish your sentences AI.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish your sentences.
Oh my gosh, I just knew it.
But no, so I love this, right? Because I use multitude of different types of AI services, and I love what you just said, right? And one thing that I've started doing for my sales team, man, is taking what I'm saying inside podcasts and transcriptions, and what am I talking about the most, and then bring that out and creating training material for the sales team. Yeah. Right, and saying, hey, look, like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what it is, because it's you don't want to go always on a tangent with your employees, right? Because like time is like they have to get back to their crap, right? So if I go on a tangent, like I can be on an hour-long tangent, right? They don't need that. Like I'm going to leave the meeting, actually. If somebody's going on a tangent, I'm like, hey, look, like, this wasn't planned, guys. But one thing that I'm able to do is take what I'm saying in a passionate way, right? But I'm able to kind of dive deep into these rabbit holes. And that's what I love about the podcast, about this podcast, is we allow for those rabbit holes, because that's where really the meat and potatoes is, and that's where a lot of people get to learn from. And taking that and building training documents or training videos or coursework, whatever it may be, for like a sales team or an HR team or whatever it may be. But my question to you is this: are you a ChatGPT guy? Are you a Claude guy? Or are you a Gemini guy? Or are you any other guy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So Claude, my brother is way smarter than I am. He's a savant. He's a AI engineer. So we've built our own custom models from
Beautiful.
scratch and use like Llama 3 and other open source models that we built on top of for different specialized pieces. So
Oh,
we can
wow.
do that. We built some silly stuff and it's fun. The business side of where I use it, I use ChatGPT for much of it because I started there before Gemini was on the
Mm-hmm.
scene. And I have a lot of my own my GPTs that I've built as a ghostwriter, as my content source, as
Mm-hmm.
a proposal writer, all that stuff that you would typically use for it. Gemini I use now because it's integrated into the Google Doc kind of suite.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's amazing being able to now ask and have the AI just do the things that took work and to provide either A, feedback on something, and I might get into that actually, I'm gonna come back to that, or B, provide the scaffolding that you can just build off of. The
Yes.
feedback, the thing
Yeah.
that I love most is that if you do a good job, ChatGPT, I have my GPT around my customer persona. And what I've done is I've interviewed my prospective customers, I've transcribed those, I've pulled those in, and now it has its own avatar that when I say, hey, I'm going to do an email campaign, how would my avatar receive this? It's able to give a response based on its like 8 different, I think I have 8 or 9 different interviews that I have in there. And it's able to say, oh, based on the demographics or what's important to them or the value props for it, here's how they may say. And so it gives you not a AI
Mm-hmm.
response. You're able to like seed it with enough context to actually be helpful to meet whatever you're actually working on. That's
Mm-hmm.
the like a huge use that I use for AI.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? Yeah, there's massive. I've been using Claude a lot, right? I love the artifacts. It's not perfect. It makes, you know, you don't need an artifact for everything, and so it'll create an artifact in really weird contextual ways, and so I have to be like, hey, don't do anything, just brainstorm. Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop doing
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah, remove that.
yeah, remove that. Stop it. Stop making artifacts. And so, but what I've realized the difference between ChatGPT, when I like about Claude, and I think OpenAI is coming to it, and they have to, right? What I like about Claude is the projects, right? So you can keep all your transcriptions and everything in one project, and then be able to reference anything within what you've attached inside there. So if I say, okay, for instance, what you do, like if you take a transcription, you can upload that transcription into the project and have 50 transcriptions in there, and you can reference those transcriptions at any given time inside of a full project. And so I like that. I'm waiting for ChatGPT to come out with folders because it is really freaking hard to handle all those dang chats. And so, one thing that I kind of want to go to from an AI perspective is, and I was just posting about this yesterday, and I saw your post today about it, which, by the way, yes, 100%, I'm in.
Yeah, that's right. The AI workshop.
Yeah,
Let's
man,
go.
I'm totally in because there's, yeah, I think yesterday in my post, what I was saying is that 2 3 years ago it was very much about let me see what I can stick to the wall. Right? What are we doing? We don't know. Like, let's just stick it to the wall. Now it's shifting, and companies are going, okay, sticking stuff to the wall isn't working, right? And it's very becoming business use case, right? What are the business use cases? How are we going to be able to utilize AI in not only a manageable way, but how are we going to govern it in a way that's good for the organization, but also keeps employees productive and allows them to move a needle forward, right? Because you don't want just employees kind of just rolling through stuff, but they never get anywhere, and it's just really fun for them, and they waste an hour or two, right? They have to actually move in a direction that not only helps them from a productivity perspective, but also helps a company, towards a business goal and objective, right? So that's whether that is a sales manager understanding his KPIs in a better way per each employee, and so it gives him the data that he needs, but also drives sales in a faster fashion, and that's the business use case, right? Hey, we need to drive sales. We need to understand what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Business use case, productivity, and that matches. With what you're doing now, how are you seeing these things correlate, and the businesses that you're talking to, and even the friend group that you have as well? How are they using it to be able to move the needle forward? Are you seeing similarities, or are you seeing very different approaches?
And there's such a wide palette that you could pull from in AI.
Mm-hmm.
Like the obvious is just content generation, ideally using the voice and tone
Yep.
ChatGPT does have a My GPT that you can upload like documents in there that it can re-reference, and I have like
Awesome.
19 proposals in there, and so it's able to go through and build and reference for it. And those are little pieces. What I've seen that I believe, especially if your audience is entrepreneurial, is that AI allows you to rapidly prototype things in a way that we just didn't have access to before. I firmly believe that now, this is probably a shade of wrong, I don't know where, but I believe like all of us now are moving from independent contributors to either strategists or editors or both. You're going
Yes.
to have something that can throw up a landing page in a matter of 20 minutes and it's good enough. You already have platforms now that can do like a screen by screen prototype that's a clickable prototype within like 2 hours. And so if you're a company and let's say you're a product manager, instead of coming with user stories or a PRD, a product requirements documentation or specs, you could use AI to come in with a prototype. It won't be perfect, but now you can have a higher fidelity understanding of like, what are we talking about? What do we want to do? What's important to reflect for it? And it allows people to like really move the ball downfield and skip large swaths of this, we think we know, let's do the research. It could do the research. It could do the analysis. It can make some recommendations and you can start testing it in a day. And that used to be in a company 2 weeks of work. If you're an entrepreneur, most of us aren't web developers. Most of us aren't, UI, UX designers for it. Now you can come up with a prototype, 4 different kinds in a day and present them in front of your customers and start saying, hey, what workflow? What do you hate? What do you love? And here's a quote. I love this quote. It isn't the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. And AI allows us to move way faster than we used to do if you're not using it to just be like, take over my job. It's more of like, what is the end goal? What's the first incremental thing that I can do now to like validate this and let it do it for you?
I love that.
If we're thinking about like the pain points of like some of the stuff that you went through as an entrepreneur, and a lot of entrepreneurs do, if not now, how long do you think it's going to take before AI gets caught up enough to the point where it can alleviate a lot of those things? Because like you said, it can go down content generation and it can build the scaffolding that you need to kind of build out mainframes of like processes and that sort of thing to get you started. But in terms of being able to identify, maybe that's a business plug. I'm sure there's some form of like an entrepreneurial AI out there that's
100%.
maybe doing. I don't know if they're doing that yet, but that would be really interesting. Do you see it getting to that point where it can alleviate some of the pain points of keeping entrepreneurs, especially as it strengthens this country, right? Do you see it getting to that point where it can identify, hey, you're going down the wrong way?
I think that's going to be yes in shades, but the more specific the problem and the more nuanced the solution, the more AI isn't. It can be right now used as broad strokes of like, give me gut checks, give me a general understanding of the demographics or the value props for it too. But that's again all scaffolding. That's a beginning platform for you to build off of for it too. What you're talking about of like getting to the nth degree of like it's giving you a lot of the answers, I still think it's going to come down to, and man, I heard this like freaking also 10 years ago, maybe 15. I heard that answers now are cheap. The real value is asking the right question. Because the right question is the thing that really matters. And the same thing with AI. The AI can generate all kinds of answers for you. Those are easy. It's asking the right way, asking the right thing, and making sure that you're not sending it. Like, it's not going to stop and say like, oh, I know you asked me for a prototype, but I don't think you should do that prototype. You should consider this. It's always going to be in some level aligned to the request that you have. And so it's going to be wholly dependent on the request that you give it. And that is where the strategy and the editor come in of like knowing what to ask, what's going to move the needle the most, and then reading the response, not at face value, but really like an editor does, ripping it apart, really challenging different pieces, having it iterate itself. One of my favorite things is like, hey, give yourself that answer you just gave me, critique it as you were like a critic for it and show me all the flaws, and then revise the answer based on like what you've been able to do. And there's iterations that you can do that just get it closer and closer, but it's still up to you to lead it in the way that's going to be valuable.
One
Yeah.
of mine, and not to cut you off, Michael, one of mine is I'll go, is that the best you can do? And
Oh, I love
it'll come
that.
back, it'll come back and go, you know what? No, thank you for the push. And then my next question is, why did you give me something less than the best? And so I'm like, I'm probably like programming this thing with like, unusual expectations of like, what the heck, what's
That's
going on
great.
here? You
You're
know?
getting ChatGPT some trauma now. It's like, I tried. I did
Right.
my best.
Honestly, I feel like I owe it because I'm getting some therapy for things I probably can't say within my workspace. I can't talk to people that
Listen,
way. So,
Chat
yeah.
GPT, all AIs are a great place to like vent. Like
Have you
just
done?
vent. Oh yeah.
I had this deal where I didn't envision myself getting old. It was like a trauma wound. And I literally said, I want you to ask a bunch of questions and I want you to help me envision me as an 80-year-old person. And then I want you to read that back to me and like almost
Mm-hmm.
edify me on what that looks like. Then yeah, like it's fantastic. You don't have the I'm going to be judged feeling. I've done lots of counseling, but I have a ChatGPT therapy buddy that I built specifically for this.
I have one too. It's so funny.
It's
That's so
amazing.
interesting.
It
I
really
was able.
is, right? Good.
I most recently programmed it into because it was cutting me off. I don't know if you guys experienced that when you're like you hit the button for the audible and it cuts you off. And I got to a point. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. When I stop talking, and I don't want you to start talking until I stop talking, I need you to pause for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, something like that, right? And then answer me back. And then that was a little too short. And so by the time I knew it, I was at like 10 seconds. And it's like sitting there waiting, and I'm waiting for it to like actually like respond. And it did. It's just a crazy tool.
Okay, you guys
It's
both use it. Can I ask you guys, what is like your secret weapon using AI right now? What is the thing that most you feel like most entrepreneurs or business owners don't do that they should be using AI for?
I'm actually building our company's first product with it.
Ooh,
Yeah,
like from a
our
couple.
first, yeah, from a code perspective, from like UI, everything, it gets like it's full on. Every like, the entire product is built. The MVP is built with AI, and it took me 3 days.
That's incredible.
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Alex, delegation. And in the areas of our lives where we're in this just this cool just field of figuring it out and one day at a time and trial and error, and not being able to, if you're one that's not able to delegate accordingly or appropriately, AI is your best friend because delegation's made easy there, right? And so I feel like specifically for me, for companies, that's like, so, and I had this question with another guest on probably a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, I said, do you get your feelings hurt when you, because at this point we can recognize when somebody sends us an email or a text message and it's all AI, right? At this point, you have to know the script. And so, but we dove into that specifically, and he kind of elaborated on how, yes, but I kind of use it in a way that it brings me what I need, and then I can go and make revisions, but I cut out 90% of everything else, right? That whole, and that's kind of the biggest challenge I see, at least from the entrepreneurial perspective, is just not enough time in the day. I spent 20-hour, 24-hour days in the oil field, just not enough time in the day to
Yeah,
get the things done that we need to get done. So
I think there's another part of that too, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs, well, when they delegate, they don't immediately replace it with something that's mission critical, right? And I
Oh,
think
that's good.
that could be an issue, right? It's like, okay, well, I delegated this. Yeah, you got it off your plate, but you didn't replace. You're still doing the same amount, except for one thing, right? When they should be replacing it with even more mission critical. So that way, everything that you're delegating and everything that's off your plate has been replaced as something mission critical that only you can be doing that makes sense for the business, right? Especially as the leader of the business. And so, and I think there's two ways to think of this, right? Is one is if you're trying to figure out whether it's a new product idea or whether it's how do we get our messaging even clearer or what can we do, right? How can we move the needle forward on the business? How can we actually make meaningful progress? And they can transfer that. They delegate something to free you up to do something else that's mission critical. And so in the age of AI, it's okay. How can I spend maybe this task freed me up for 15 minutes. okay, I got 15 more minutes. Let me see if I can create something in ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, whoever, right? When any of the AIs that gives me the infrastructure or gives me the ideas or sparks an idea of what I'm doing to be able to make something meaningful that you can go to the team with. Or if you're starting out, gives you the foundation to go, okay, I didn't think of it this way. Let me actually go and do this instead.
I love that. One of my things that I tell my clients that they should be doing, I think every 6 months at minimum, is that you should commonly write down where you're spending all of your time, from greatest time spent to least time spent. But then you should forget that list and write down a new list of what is the most important time to the least important time that you spend. And you'll see that there's generally a disconnect. And what you should be doing commonly is taking that bottom 40, 50% and delegating it, automating it, deferring it, deleting it. Like, you just need to get rid of it, because what we all have, because we're humans, is the pull of the urgent over the important. The important stuff is the strategy, is the crafting the next offering, it is the building the product. But the urgent is the voicemails that you have on your phone and the emails you haven't returned. That's not going to get you to where you want to go. It'll keep you from, potentially dealing with consequences. But it's this other side, the important, that is exactly your point, Michael, of like, if you delegate or use AI to move the needle for you, you need to have a very clear understanding of where you need to spend that time. So you don't just be like, cool, what else do I do? Let me just go do this. And it becomes busy work and not impactful.
That's right.
Work.
Oh, and that, I mean, hold on. Busy work is another freaking podcast in itself. Like, right? I mean, every entrepreneur is, every entrepreneur does it, right? We think that we are so much more productive than we actually really are. We think that we're working on the mission critical things, and we're not actually working on the mission critical things, right? It's I can't remember who was saying it. It might have been Simon Sinek. I think he was like, it's the $10 an hour task versus the $100 an hour task.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that, like, okay, what's $10 an hour? Delegate. $100 an hour, that's on you, right? And it's these, like, trying to differentiate what is and what's not a 10 and 100. And I actually think it actually makes the difference between an entrepreneur that's fast and an entrepreneur that takes a couple more years to get where they need to go. Right, is understanding which ones are the actual pieces that you need to work on. There was a guy, I can't remember, I think of Next View Ventures, or maybe it was from Greylock. I can't remember, one of the guys, one of the large venture in PE firms. He had worked on so many deals and so many companies that he came up with the 100 task list. Right, it was 100 tasks. I'll find it. I'm gonna send it to you. And it was 100 tasks that every startup needed to work on that would get them to where they need to go. These are the 100 tasks that are critical that you need to work on, right? And it was built into like a roadmap of like, these are the tasks that you do in order to make what you need to do grow. And it wasn't this based on like, oh, I'm the next guru, I'm gonna do it. Like, this guy is invested in hundreds of companies, right? The PE firm has invested billions of dollars in organizations now. And so like, it was really cool to like actually just see what it looked like and how he was doing it. The only thing that I will say was it was very, very SaaS focused, right? And building a SaaS company is different than building a plumbing company, right? It's very different, sure. And that's actually really cool. I have a question for you that just sparked something. Of the entrepreneurs that you're working with, how many of them are service, product, or technology focused, and where do you see the similarities between those entrepreneurs?
Super great question. Of the 250 that I've coached, of probably the 30 that I actively coach now, I probably have 3 technologies, 90% either product or service, most of them. And there are things that don't apply directly if you're, a product or service for it. But actually, there's a lot in the SaaS world that I feel like is at the bleeding edge of like management analytics, of knowing your customer acquisition costs, your lifetime customer value, your churn. And these are SaaS metrics that you have. But honestly, they're all really important. Whether you're a therapist, a plumber, you have a leash, company, because you may have, for instance, a good example is like there's customer acquisition cost and generally lifetime value cost, and they feel stagnant. But if you're SaaS, you're always looking for reverse churn. You're looking to provide other offerings so that same customer stays in your ecosystem, pays more money, have a higher contract value overall, and that has product development implications or service offering implications, because now you're able to take the one customer that you've fought and paid for and give them more value, make it more sticky, and get more money from them because they're now using multiple of your services. So I do see that what I typically do is take my knowledge of SaaS and distill it down to the most important things that is applicable to this company. Most of the time, it is, again, changing how people think, more than just giving them an education on here what these metrics mean and here's how you measure them. It's more of like, how are you, if your goal is to take a $2 million company and making a $20 million company, you need to start with the end in mind and what needs to be true for that to happen. And if you're a service-based company, that's a level of scale that you're not going to just like bumble into. You're not going to do that accidentally. You have to start with the end in mind. And there's things that you learn from how to scale in SaaS that you can directly apply with automation, people, AI in other businesses.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Talking about AI, which I think many kind of say is like the future, right? I want to dive into like the future of what you've got going on just a little bit, if you're open to talk about it. Because there was a question I was going to ask you about like looking back and, one thing you sacrificed that you wish you could reclaim. And I want to redesign that moving forward into the future, into the things that you're doing, if that is the coaching 100%, consulting 100%, or other endeavors. What are you going to do differently now, right? As you've moved through some of those things that didn't work, that, and especially as a coach, now you've gotten 250 opportunities to, learn from other people's, successes and probably somewhat failures and stories. What's like for Alex, what's your mission statement going forward? Or the proprietary, you don't want to give us your goal.
No, I love this. This is great. Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. You guys know this, right?
Yeah.
No, the thing that I have shifted my mindset on is to not think just locally and to think globally. Just like the internet was a flattening of our world, because now the Library of Alexandria was like the biggest body of knowledge that we could possibly hold in one single place. And now on our phones, we have access to, like, I don't even know, orders of magnitude, far more than what that is. Knowledge became ubiquitous and flattened the world for us. AI is doing the same thing. And what that means is now you can have a product that can potentially be localized live. And it's early in infancy now, but like if you're thinking in terms of the next thing, and I'll land the plane on like what I'm going to do, you can't just think Oklahoma, West Coast, U.S., the West. You can think in terms of being able to have a product or service that potentially is online, that is localized to individual languages, that you can collaborate with people across the entire world. And even language barriers won't be language barriers for long, because you can have inline translations for it. And so one of the things that I'd love to do, that I've started talking to a buddy of mine, Yamu Media, phenomenal like marketing company. He is, I'm going to give him credit for this, has this vision of like, I want to create an actual incubator accelerator, but not be localized. Have the best people with the local, highly defined problems for it too, and be able to leverage AI and all the knowledge that we have of just like startup methodologies and how to like run MVPs, and get the largest amount of people to opt in and use these tools to be able to help build, prototype, rapidly market and launch and test markets for it in India, in Kenya, in Argentina. Like all these markets are untapped, and the internet with the knowledge flattening was a big part of it. But now AI can build code and do translation and connect in highly defined ways and cultures and geographies that we've never even thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. And yeah, that would be insane, right? Because it now puts, like you were talking about, right? It now puts everyone globally on the same playing field,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, because we're in an AI revolution, and this is the next revolution, and the next one I believe is going to be super intelligence.
Yes, definitely.
And then when super intelligence comes, that is going to be the overlay of what we build today, and over the next 10 years. And so that in itself, and executing on it well, is going to be, I mean, that's like larger than Y Combinator, right? Like it allows it to be on such a global scale, and that is cool. So I'll be watching that closely. That's awesome.
You know what's really wild? This keeps me up at night. I forget who to attribute this to as well, but there was a question that I remember reading saying, was Albert Einstein the smartest man in the last 100 years? And most people say like, yeah, he's at least up there. And what was fascinating and haunting at the same time is the thought that this resource, I forget where it was, uh, proposed is that almost assuredly, statistically, Albert Einstein was not the smartest person alive. He was the smartest person alive that didn't die in infancy, that had the resources to learn, that then had the support to be able to do the things he did. But very likely, we have somebody in Nigeria that is an absolute genius on the human species scale, and they don't do that. Stephen Lynch is currently the smartest man, I believe, in the United States. And if I remember correctly, he's like a bouncer in Rhode Island. And like that is crazy to me
What?
that you have
Yeah, I think I know what you're
crazy,
talking about.
super intelligent people with IQs of, I think, 210. I forget what Stephen Lynch's is. But you have that now on a global scale that we didn't have access to. And I believe that this is now where it isn't just altruistic. I want to, bring the internet, electricity, clean water to other countries. It is because from a human perspective, that is in our best interest because then we have the best people across the entire globe have more opportunity to impact like all of our lives. And that is that lights me up. That's an exciting thought.
Man, that's huge. Man, it's going to take me a minute to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, right. It's tough to wrestle with. We think very locally, and we were trained to, but we're
Right.
the generation that's going to have the toughest time bridging that gap because the generations that are following are already thinking globally. They're interacting at such a level, right? We have
Man.
Facebook groups that came from our high schools and our workplaces for it too. They're making connections across, potentially the globe, and we don't have that inline translation yet. I think it's going to be just a matter of time.
Oh,
Yeah,
100%.
I sometimes wonder that, and this is probably a whole nother podcast that we might have to dive into later. But I sometimes wonder, you think about the current generation coming up, having complete access from day one, birth, having technology at their fingertips, and I think like the standard way of thinking is, well, they have technology, so they're lazy and they don't want to do anything. But I think they just learned a little too quickly, too many things. And I think what helped us, and I don't know how old you are, Alex, but with Michael and I being in our 30s and kind of getting a mix of both, what helped us was like that journey, right? The checkpoints of like getting to each location and kind of learning along the way. And now, like you said, you can jump on YouTube, and my wife laughs at me all the time. She's like, "Are you watching people put sod in?" I'm like, "You just never know when you need to sod your yaw." Or
I
lay
don't know what I don't
concrete.
know.
Yeah, DIY. I might need to do that turfing the yard. Who knows?
Right.
But I'm just absorbing, and that's just from my viewpoint. I can't imagine from the current generation coming up and what they've been able to absorb. And maybe that just opens up to just too many options.
Yeah.
Where we didn't have enough, right? Enough support, enough resources like you're talking about.
Matt, the one thing my mind has shifted quite a bit, I would say over the last like 2-3 years, where I was like, Gen Z and Gen Alpha is going to screw our freaking world up, right? I was like, I can't imagine them being our next leaders. But today being, man, there's some of the smartest people that I've ever met, right? They're some of the most creative, right? And I think a lot of times we can misinterpret creative for laziness, or created for not wanting more, or like, it's almost kind of like that starving
Undisciplined
artist
or stuff.
personality, right? But I think when you take creativity and somebody that's super creative, right? But you say, hey, look, like, you can be as creative as you want to be here, right? Like, don't stop with the shiny object syndrome. Be creative here, right? And I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha did brilliantly with that over the last 40 years of social media, right? They put it on a completely different playing field than I ever thought it would be, right? I thought I was like, man, I don't know how much dancing I can take. I don't know how much stuff I can take here, right? And
TikTok trend.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But then it quickly changed. I was like, wait. I was like, it's not even about that. I was like, now these people that put themselves out there to go dance are creating some of the largest brand deals you've ever seen, right? I mean, a mom in Wisconsin that freaking put her 9 to 5 or her 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Life online is now freaking doing a brand deal with, Chobani or something. Like, it's crazy, right? But it just shows just how creative people can be and really where opportunities lie. And a lot of times the barrier to business used to be knowledge, right? It's like, I have this set of knowledge that I have gained over a course of time that has allowed me to understand this niche to be able to build a business around. Right now, it's so different.
I have a pretty provocative, probably, viewpoint on this. One of my coaching consulting engagements was with a AI education company, and it was fascinating. So let me start with the headline. I believe the systems are teaching our kids of tomorrow the world of yesterday. And I think there's a systemic failure of actually preparing your kids and the students and Gen Z and Gen Alpha for like what it actually is like. Our education system is lagging behind curriculum, and there's reasons for it. It isn't because anybody's lazy or being dumb. It's because there's safety mechanisms, and now technology in the world is changing and completely outpacing what we have. However, I do believe we're like one revolution away from solving that in a way that's going to blow our mind. So one, the education system, let's pick on that for a second. Like, the summer off was because we had harvesting, right? And we had a school the rest of the year because then they weren't as needed in the fields. But we also sent them to physical locations because we didn't have the ability to scale. So you had one person and you congregated 30 students. You sent people to universities because, again, you had the smartest people and a bunch of people taking those classes. AI and the internet is the flattening. Imagine a world where instead of having a lecturer pontificate at the podium at the very front to 300 people, you have your own Jarvis AI buddy. And it isn't just for a class. It starts at kindergarten, knows enough about you, the learning styles that you have, your level of advancement for it. When you get something wrong in a test, it's able to follow up and like correct that so you don't leave a gap in your knowledge. And it follows you not just until you graduate, but for the rest of your life. And it's telling you about the new modern practices for marketing or for chemical engineering. And all the research that we're getting, it's able to absorb, distill, and convey that to somebody. And so there's this wonderful, fascinating kind of corollary that I remember, like in the dawn of the 20th century, it's like 1908. There was this article in London, I think, where it said that, hey, based on, maybe it was like 1901, but based on London's growth and population, the city will be buried in like 10 feet of manure in 30 years because they didn't see the car coming. And they were just looking at how much horses and people it takes to move around. We're one revolution away from changing how we look at the world that I believe Gen Z and Alpha will tap into and leverage so much better than we have. And that is where it's going to be yet another like leapfrog in understanding, leapfrog in their ability to make an impact and to learn in a way that you're just not memorizing, but maybe instead look, you could be in a college and have a Jarvis buddy, but multiple AI and have a project manager, a business analyst, a customer, and all of them are virtual assistants, basically AI assistants. And instead of learning case studies, you can actually interact with these avatars and personas and learn in a whole different way. Those are the things that I feel like the world of tomorrow needs that I get really excited about.
Man, it's one thing that I'm kind of just thinking like on what you said here, right? And I think the real commodity of tomorrow is data, and
Yeah.
Ooh.
and that's probably the biggest thing, right? Is the data that we acquire and the data that we can garner over a lifetime. Imagine your kids, right? They're born, and from the time they talk to the time that they pass away, right, has a lifetime of them interacting with a Jarvis, right? And it sounds Jetson like, but we're here today doing it. But now we're just starting a lot early to where you can tap into your first words. You can tap into like what were those childlike experiences that you're, imagine how many people can get over the trauma that they actually had, right? Or how many people can, or
goodness.
whatever. I mean, it'd be absolutely insane to be able to go back, because we always talk about this point in time, right? Or when you have an anxiety attack or whatever it is, it's like, hey, what is it that caused it? What was that one piece, right? What was that point in time moment that caused you to kind of move into that headspace? And then now, whether you're stuck in a problem, you have a problem with your relationship, you don't know what to do, you can actually tap into the Jarvis and go, hey, throughout my lifetime, like what is a pattern that I need to change?
It's a fun prompt. Yeah. Well, yeah, I want to talk about that. That's interesting. But it's a fun prompt. If you've been using AI, Claude, and you have these artifacts or ChatGPT, I saw this online. Based on all the interactions that you've had with me, what is something I may not know about myself? Very fun prompt, because it's able to like give you something you're like, oh shoot, that's kind of interesting. And it's still in its infancy. It's still kind of a dumb AI model, right? Imagine that exact thing where it knows you really well, but it knows trauma handling, and it knows interpersonal relationship, and it knows pedagogy of the ability to teach and the modern practices and like lead you through all of that. That is, I think, for us entrepreneurs and for us old fogies, because we're now in our 30s, I'm 38, we're old compared to the generation growing up. There is going to be this tendency that we distrust how they use technology, that there's going to be an AI buddy or VR space. We're going to be like, man, get your head out of that, get in the real world, go, climb a tree. And the world's changed, and we have to be ready to change with it, or we're not really doing them any service.
100%.
Man, you've
Go ahead.
relayed so many protocols so far on this podcast. Like I'm going to be in a frenzy tomorrow on ChatGPT asking it all. Asking it, wait, it's going to be like, slow down. On that topic, before we, move out of it, I'm curious because again, I had another question for you, and it was kind of premised around if your work today could influence an entrepreneur 100 years from now, right? What's the one principle or philosophy you hope they adopt and carry forward into their world? And I want to shift that. Because talking about AI, talking about the flattening, having access to a tool like AI, what core, if you had to think about it, what core fundamental values of being an entrepreneur and tactics do you think will survive the test of time and still be a Stone Age, have success from a Stone Age perspective in this new modern world 100 years from now, where entrepreneurs and the generation of that day are just click, boom, in the phone? Do you think there's like is that interpersonal like connection between people? Do you have an idea?
That's so hard. You can go a couple ways, because I don't think people are going to be replaced. I think there's still going to be the need to have EQ, interpersonal relationships, be influential, be inspiring. Like actually, there's a lot, if you follow Simon Sinek, he's really big on that. Like leadership and authority, influence and authority are not the same thing. And I think that's going to be a big piece of that. I think if there's one trait that I think will survive across the epochs that we have ahead, is the trait of audacity. is the feeling that we can envision a world that is so demonstrably different than ours, that we can envision us as a multiplanetary species, that we can envision us in a world without cancer, that we can envision us living to 300. And I think AI, I don't know, this is where you talk about super intelligence and if there's real consciousness there, because that takes a level of creativity that the models don't have. Like they've been fed all the things that they have. I don't know. There's questions on like if it's possible, if it's the next 20 years, the next 4 years, if it's the next ever. But I think if the entrepreneurs of 100 years from now and the entrepreneurs of today have one thing in common, that is one of the single biggest things that they can do is don't think iteratively. Don't think in terms of how can we make our classrooms online. Think in terms of what does the education need to look like 100 years from now without the constraints of what we have today. And you start with that end and work backwards and not from where we are today and iterate forward. If you iterate forward, you're going to be held with the suppositions and assumptions and all the constraints that we have today, and it'll be incremental. But if you have the audacity to truly dream a world that doesn't exist, truly dream of how far you can take quantum theories and black holes and white holes and do wormholes and travel across the cosmos, like that audacity is going to be the thing that moves our civilization forward. That audacity, especially with AI leveling the playing field, is going to be what creates the difference between a global impacting company and a small iterative, vendor.
Wow.
That's FYI. That's a quote that's going on social for sure. I love that, right? Like entrepreneurs of tomorrow don't think iteratively, but think without constraints.
Yeah.
Man, that's massive, right? Because I think we always want to put ourselves in these like constraints because that's how we're taught, right? Where it's like, okay, like I'm gonna think this way, but if I get too far out there, then I'm an entrepreneur that's just not focused and not niched in, right?
Yeah.
But I think I think being able to think in that realm really gives benefit to new ideas, birthing new products, and birthing new services, and birthing everything.
It's worth mentioning, you eventually collide with reality. We're not talking about dreaming big and not worry about it, but you don't start with reality. You start with the vision, and then you figure out what needs to happen to reach this vision, and then you start connecting the dots of, okay, if we need to have a point where every student has their own Jarvis. What does that mean? What does that mean for technology, for wearables, for continuity, for security? And then you start connecting of where we are today and where that gap is. You collide it eventually, but you just don't start with that. And that I feel like when I coach my clients, we don't do forecasts, we do visions, and a 10-year vision. Because if somebody is at $2 million and they want to be $200 million and they are a furniture company, you're not going to do that starting from today and just saying we're going to open up another store and another store. You have to do something considerably different for it. And you only break that mold starting with, okay, what does $200 million looks like? What does that even what needs to be true for that to be a reality?
It's almost like I have a theory, and it's not really a theory. It's something that actually happens. I don't know if you guys look at things this way. I call it the Chinese buffet theory, where you go through the line at the Chinese buffet or whatever buffet it might be, and you have the two types of people. You have the people who look through the glass the way it's supposed to happen because it's glass.
There you go.
And you have the people who are ducking underneath the look underneath the glass, right? And I feel like right now, at least, for like the last 20, 30 years, societies, we've kind of been looking underneath the glass, doing it just getting outside the box and doing things differently, right? And I kind of feel like the future's heading towards a world of AI and a world of this like singularity where it's like, just look through the glass, just use it the way it's supposed to be used. I could be wrong. That's just something I was picking up off that.
What do you think, Michael?
No, I agree. I think where we're going in the world is, I'll say one, exciting, but I think two, it's the amount of ideas that are going to be generated off of everything that we see today is absolutely encouraging. I think is really cool. I think it's really cool to say. I think to be able to tap into how other entrepreneurs think, how others are looking at current problems and how they're solving those problems, is I think we're coming to I think we're finally coming together more than what media wants to put on. I think we're finally coming together and solving real world issues, right? And
I
we
agree.
actually have the ability to do it today. And it's not even, and we're still in infancy, right? But yet we still have that ability to do it today.
It's fascinating. This is the best time ever to be alive.
100%.
Like,
Oh man,
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
it's I,
I think hopefully, you'd be open to another discussion at another time. I'm like
Definitely.
contextually really interested. I did a podcast recently with two gentlemen who are over in East Africa and Kenya. And we were just able to culturally kind of collide what's happening from an entrepreneurial perspective. And so with you coming from the Ukraine, I don't know if you'd be comfortable speaking on that. That would be something that'd be really interesting to know kind of what from a global perspective, because you're talking globally earlier, from a global perspective where things are aligning. And so the Days End Podcast are really interested about that. Maybe that's another podcast for another time. But do you find yourself to be a completionist still, looking for that next completion, or are you a process guy?
I want to answer process guy, but I'm still a completionist. I still want to ship something. I want to see impact. And,
yeah,
the philosophy of like life is a journey and you can't control the outputs. I am gravitating towards that. However, I think part of the drive that makes us entrepreneurs is that we're kind of discontent. We're naturally discontented for just the status quo or just the good enough. And so I am a completionist, but it's tempered with, I think, a much longer time horizon than I had at first. Now I'm thinking about what the next couple of decades look like,
yeah.
not what the next 2 years looks like.
I love that. I have I have two questions for you to leave with, and one or two sentences is perfect. What do you say, whether that is statement or advice, to the entrepreneur that's trying to get out there and do it, and they really don't know the next step, versus the entrepreneur, and the same question now to the entrepreneur that is successful, semi-successful, and they're stuck in a rut. Like, what do you say to them?
Two solid questions. To the one that's just starting out and doesn't really know, there's a thought process. Figure out the what, and then worry about the how. One of the biggest trouble that the trouble we get into is that we conflate too many things into a decision of like, should I start this business? But then how am I going to get customers? How am I going to do all this? And really, if you bifurcate those and say, you know what, let's be really clear about the what I want to do, what needs to be accomplished, what the value is. And only after you get clear about that, then connect the dots to the how. It'll allow you to make a clearer decision with less cognitive like load in your brain. And then you can be fully focused on making the best choice on the what. The how, there are multitude of resources, internet and AI, that can get you to the how. To the entrepreneur that is doing the thing, semi-successful, but in a rut or stuck, you kind of have to go back to first principles of like, what is the next one? Don't start iteratively again. It is, what is the world of tomorrow look like? And what is that going to be? And how can I be a part of manifesting that there? And there is a direct advice that I'd have, which is go back into entrepreneurial mode. Be lean, be scrappy, build an MVP, have your teams do the core business, have your teams continue to do the beats and drums of the sales and the operations and customer success. You put yourself back into the entrepreneurial chair and figure it out. Be lean. Don't throw your team at it. They won't be the entrepreneurial, figure things out, challenge it and have all the customers and iterate. They're not, statistically, they're probably not going to be the people to do that. Put yourself back in the entrepreneurial chair, find the path forward, the what for it. And then once you validated that, then you can pull in your team to figure out what that next big hill that you need to storm is.
I love that. That is fantastic.
or, just look up Alex G Consulting. Plug time. plug time.
Or look me up. I'll say this. I do a 30-minute consult with anybody who reaches out to me. It is not a sales conversation. In the 30 minutes, I learn enough about the company. We are workshopping ideas. We're setting up experiments to test. It is about how quickly you can land on a good enough idea, and how can you quickly vet that out to see if you're right or wrong, and let the data tell you where you need to go. And so if anybody's interested in just a thought partner, workshopping ideas, go to alexg.consulting, click on set up a call or contact me now, and promise you, like, it isn't a sales pitch. We'll dive in and have this level of like iterative conversation of what you can do.
I love that.
LinkedIn. You wanna plug LinkedIn real quick and spell out your last name, that way everybody can find the right.
We need to throw that into unfortunately my LinkedIn I think is like alex.golimbievsky. I need to change that. And so it's if you look up Alex Golimb, there's Golimbievsky, you'll find me in there. It's not like Smith. That name is weird back in Ukraine too. So you'll find me out of all the Ukrainian bunch. And reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Not as active on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Find me over there. Connect with me. I'd love to have a conversation.
Alex, this was beyond insightful. This was beyond our pleasure to host you too. Thank you for spending almost north of 2 hours, which just felt like a cigar talk, like I told you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So this was really fun. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of share your story, some of the vulnerabilities to our audience, and hopefully there's a next time.
Let's do it next time. This was a blast. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. The honor is all mine, I assure you. You guys keep doing God's work.
Hey, appreciate that, man. Awesome.
Until next time.